Being necessary to the security of the free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The sacred words of our forefathers, the greatest Americans to have ever lived, in the truest meaning of the word patriot, wrote these words down in 1787, and thus granted the people of a nation the right to protect those they hold dearest. Today, 237 years after that ink dried, the question of whether or not the American citizen can own a firearm has been asked time and time again. Sparked by bloodshed in schools, offices, and the streets, this question has become ever more prevalent in this nation. According to the Pew Research Center, established in Washington, D.C., 58% of Americans favor strict gun laws, another 26% feel as if the gun laws are fine as they are now, and another 15% favor less strict gun laws. What I would like to propose is the idea that a mental health crisis is the underlying cause of gun violence in America and not the guns themselves. Advocates for gun control should not promote the confiscation of guns, but better mental health across the United States. What do you think goes on in the mind of a mass shooter? Do you think that they think they're doing something great and heroic, or are they ashamed while the whole time they conjure up their attack plan? Do they think about the victims' families? Do they think that they're even going to make it out alive, or do they wish for some sort of suicide by cop situation? Studies and evidence have shown that mass shooters have mental health issues. Though the odd number could be classified as racially or criminally motivated, it is apparent that most mass shooters have these mental health issues. For example, the Columbine shooters, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, just 17 and 18 years old, killed 12 students and a teacher and injured 24 others at their local high school. Before this atrocity, there was no medical diagnosis for either of the boys, but afterward, FBI-sponsored psychologists labeled Eric Harris a psychopath and Dylan Klebold a depressed kid with schizotypal personality disorder. If anyone had caught the warning signs before the massacre, do you think that they would have stepped foot in a school with their armory of weapons? If the U.S. was more versed in mental health and could provide better care for our ill citizens, we could prevent so many more massacres. According to the American Academy of Psychiatry and Law, virtually all school shooters can be given some sort of psychiatric diagnosis. More examples include the Sandy Hook shooter, who had 5 separate mental health issues, or the Virginia Tech shooter, who on top of several underlying conditions had severe suicidal tendencies. With all this knowledge gained after these massacres happened, a solution to these problems becomes clear. We, as a people, need to identify at-risk people in our communities and have them get the help they need before they can act. According to Jillian Peterson, PhD, an associate professor of criminology and criminal justice at Hamline University, her team of criminal analysts have identified 30 different potential prevention strategies to stop mass shootings before they happen. Some of the most promising include anonymous reporting systems in schools, which would allow students to report suspicious activity among their peers. Training in safe gun storage and crisis and suicide prevention classes and seminars held much like health classes, which are mandatory across the states and education systems, could also prove helpful. Promoting mental health in the schools will not only help students identify at-risk people around them in their communities, but also maybe shed light into the brains of those who are at risk, and perhaps encourage them to seek out the help they so desperately need. If you would like to support such programs, please look into the Let It End With Us program, sponsored by the National Library of Medicine and the Delaware Journal of Public Health. Though I feel as most of us as a nation can agree that mental health has a role in the gun violence epidemic, some may argue that stricter gun laws need to be in place, or even a ban on guns would put an end to this whole epidemic abruptly. There is one obvious flaw with this logic. If the government had the people surrender their firearms, their Second Amendment right, only the law-abiding citizens would give up their firearms, while the criminals across the nation would stash their weapons, which would eventually gain in value and foster a black market for them. According to Daniel D. Polsby, a former dean at the Antonian Scalia School of Law and author of Firearms and Crime, gun control laws do not work. primarily because illicit markets easily adapt to government restrictions on gun purchases and possession. If a mentally ill person wants a firearm and firm gun laws are in place, then all they would have to do is find the connections and they can have access to any firearm they want. All the while, the good people of the US, the ones who wanted to protect themselves and their families, are left defenseless. For example, NBC covered a story in which a pregnant Floridian woman fatally shot an armed home intruder with an AR-15 after her husband was knocked unconscious. What do you think would have happened if she didn't have that firearm? I certainly wouldn't want to know. In conclusion, the solution to ending a national epidemic of mass shootings is not to disarm the people, as those who wish to do harm will find a way to instill it upon the masses whether or not laws are in place, but to help these individuals before their mental health crisis turns into a crisis of life and death.